The screen remains black. The only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a cassette tape spinning, a ghost in the machine. Then, a voice breaks through. It isn't the booming, jovial roar of the man the world thought they knew. It is thin. It is weary. It is the sound of a giant realizing he is mortal. John Candy was the world's best friend, the oversized heartbeat of Hollywood who traded in laughter to hide a deepening well of sorrow. But in the sweltering heat of the Chihuahuan desert, during the filming of his final movie, the laughter stopped. These are the tapes the public was never meant to hear, private recordings and whispered final confessions captured in the shadows of a Mexican hotel room. They reveal a man grappling with a prophetic sense of his own end, haunted by the very weight that made him a star. What John Candy said in those final hours wasn't a joke, it was a plea. We think we knew how he died, but we never understood why he felt he had to stay until the very last frame. Prepare yourself. This is the heavy, heartbreaking truth of the man behind the smile. The stage lights of Second City didn't just illuminate John Candy, they consumed him. To the world, he was a force of nature, a mountain of charisma that moved with the grace of a dancer. But beneath the polyester suits and the sweating brow of the Schmenge brothers, or Uncle Buck, lay a man who lived in a state of perpetual emotional surveillance. John knew that his value was tied to the comfort of others. If the room was silent, he had failed. If a stranger didn't feel like they could hug him, he was invisible. In the mid-80s, John was the undisputed king of the lovable loser archetype. Yet, in the quiet transitions between takes, the silence was deafening. He was a man who suffered from an almost pathological need to please. He would fly across the country just to attend a friend's party, terrified that his absence would be interpreted as a lack of love. He was an emotional sponge, soaking up the anxieties of everyone around him until he was heavy with a weight that no diet could shed. He often sat in his trailer, staring into the vanity mirror, watching the makeup artist cover the dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't just tired, he was spiritually depleted. The industry viewed him as a commodity of joy. They saw the 300-pound frame and saw a punchline, or a warm blanket. They didn't see the man who stayed up until dawn, pacing his living room, wondering if people loved John, or if they just loved the way John made them feel about themselves. He began to feel like a prisoner of his own persona, a jolly giant trapped in a cage of expectations. But as the 90s dawned, the light in his eyes began to flicker, replaced by a haunting realization: the world wanted more of him than he had left to give. To understand the tragedy of John's final days, one must look at the ghost of his father. Sidney Candy had died of a heart attack at the age of 35. John was only 5 years old. That trauma became the foundational brick of his psyche. He spent his entire life running away from that number, yet subconsciously sprinting toward the same fate. Every chest pain was a reminder, every breathless moment after a scene was a cold finger tapping on his shoulder. By the time he reached the set of Wagons East in 1994, the physical toll was undeniable. He was exhausted. He was smoking heavily, a nervous habit to coat the raw nerves of his anxiety. His heart was a tired engine trying to move a mountain. But the psychological weight was heavier. John felt the shifting tides of Hollywood. He was terrified of becoming a has-been, of the phone stopping its insistent ringing. He pushed himself to work in the brutal heat of Durango, Mexico, despite his body screaming for rest. He began carrying a small tape recorder. He told people he was taking notes for a future project, but the recordings tell a different story. They were a digital diary of a man coming to terms with his fragility. In one recording, you can hear the desert wind whistling in the background as John whispers, "I don't know if I can get through tomorrow. It's so hot. Everything is so heavy." It wasn't just the heat of Mexico, it was the heat of a life lived at the boiling point of public scrutiny. He was a man who spent his life making sure everyone else was okay, while he was slowly drowning in plain sight. In those dark Mexican nights, John started making phone calls that sounded less like greetings and more like final goodbyes. The night of March 3, 1994, was thick with the scent of dust and old wood. John had just finished filming his final scenes. He was proud of the work, but there was a strange, somber air about him. He cooked a late-night spaghetti dinner for his assistants, playing the host one last time. He laughed, he toasted, he made sure everyone was fed. But when the door closed and he was alone in room 120 of the Camino Real Hotel, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The tapes from this final period are harrowing. John speaks about his children, Jennifer and Chris, with a tenderness that feels like a man looking at a photograph he knows he's about to lose. He speaks of his wife, Rosemary, as his only anchor in a world that felt increasingly like a storm. But then, the tone shifts. He talks about the darkness that had been following him since he was a boy. "I think I'm done," he says in one whisper, the tape hissing. "I think I've given it all away. There's nothing left in the well." He wasn't just talking about his career. He was talking about his soul. He had spent decades being the big guy everyone leaned on, but in that hotel room, he was just a scared boy from Toronto who missed his father. He spoke into the recorder about a dream he'd had, a dream of a wide, open field where he could finally sit down and not have to be funny. He sounded relieved. For the first time in 43 years, the pressure to perform was fading into a cold, quiet peace. He put the recorder down, turned off the light, and closed his eyes. By morning, the world would wake up to a reality it wasn't prepared to face. The news hit the world like a physical blow. John Candy was gone. Heart attack. Age 43. The numbers finally caught up to the man who had spent a lifetime trying to outrun them. The grief was universal, it felt as though the world had lost a favorite uncle. But as the shock faded, the tapes remained, a haunting testament to the man behind the myth. What John said in those final days wasn't shocking because it was scandalous. It was shocking because it was so human. We expect our icons to be larger than life, especially the funny ones. We don't want to believe that the man who made us laugh until we cried was himself crying until he couldn't breathe. The tapes reveal that John Candy knew he was dying. He felt the light fading, and instead of bitterness, he chose to spend his last sparks of energy ensuring that those around him felt loved. His legacy isn't just the movies, the iconic characters, or the legendary comedic timing. It is the lesson of the secret tapes, that the greatest gift you can give is often the one you most need yourself. John gave the world kindness because he knew how cold the world could feel. He gave us laughter because he knew the weight of sorrow. Today, when we see his face on a screen, we shouldn't just see a comedian. We should see a man who carried the world on his shoulders so we didn't have to. The secret isn't what he said, it's that he kept talking, kept giving, and kept loving, right until the very last revolution of the tape. The mechanical hiss ends. The room is silent. But the warmth he left behind? That never stops spinning.